some inspiration. And at that moment, an angel whispered in my ear, Dan Conaway.
Angel? Dan Conaway, an angel.
Window. Well, actually, no, really, what happened was I was thinking, I have got to find a plan B, call Dan Conaway, and then I thought, he'll like the sound of an angel whispering his name. The plan B is God's honest truth. So, we have, and you're going to get to laugh a lot more today than you would have if we had our scholar. Dan, first and foremost, is a wonderful parishioner of Grace St. Luke's. I know most of you know him. If you don't, you're in for a treat. One of the best storytellers I've ever been around, either on the page or in the air. A faithful Christian member of our parish, and great company, and someone we all know and love very much. Dan has owned 2 ad agencies. He's owned 2 consulting boutiques. He does a lot of consulting still today. But what most of us right now, when I think of Dan first and foremost in his work, I think of, and raise your hand if you've seen it, his column, I'm a Memphian. You seen it? Okay, great. If you have not, you need to get it. And you can get it via his website, which is called wakesomebodyup.com. He's got this, it's in the Daily News, comes out on Thursdays. It comes in my inbox at about 5 or 6 a.m. I should not tell him this, but on Thursday mornings, it's the first thing that I read. And sometimes I go to morning prayer, and I need morning prayer after I've read what he's written. But always I'm entertained. It's a lot of fun, and you can see from his column his wide range of interests. He'll address everything from the Grizzlies to architecture to the city-school merger to you name it. He will just about cover it. He is someone who is fascinated by place. And he may be Southern in that regard. He is fascinated by this church and the physical fabric of this church and our stained glass windows. And I know I'm a preacher, so I look for connections. But I really do believe this. There's something fitting about dropping the architect in his lecture called Heaven on Earth and moving to Dan and doing this window tour with the color and the saltiness that he will bring to this. Dan is somebody who loves place too, and I really do believe that it's sacred place, that churches like this one actually helps us to appreciate all places. I think if you can fall in love with your church place, you begin to love all places. I've said before that it's not that God is any more present in this place than somewhere else, but you come to this place in order to discover that God's actually present everywhere. And I think Dan in his writing and in his life is somebody who gets that on a deep level. But one caveat, as you listen to him, there's something that Nora, his wife of 42 years, and his 2 children often say about him that I think is good for all of us to remember. He's often wrong, but never in doubt. So keep that in mind. And then last but not least, and I'll tell you more about this, and we'll advertise it in the fall. He's got books we published this fall out of Oxford. The press there is owned and run by a guy, an author named Neil White, who many of us love. And his book is going to be called I'm a Memphian. It's a collection of his columns. So it'll be really exciting for us to see that. And with all of that, please join me in welcoming Dan to the Rector's House.
As he goes back to his
Dan,
seat.
it may not get any better than that.
No, it's not. It's not. As he goes back to his seat, everybody noticed that Richard has on some very cool new stonks that are very trendy looking. The shoes. Show him your shoes, Richard. They're pretty nice.
Well, yeah, I got to see this. This is the truth.
We'll get to mine in a minute.
Yeah. I have on black clogs for one reason and one reason only. I wore my nice Alden dress shoes for about 2 days straight through the airport twice. I have blistered. I have to walk from my hotel to the conference center for the ordination, and my feet just gone off. It was awful. So they're at least black. You really won't notice. Dan, you weren't supposed to.
Do I need this?
Yes.
I do? Okay. I think what we're going to talk about a little bit today, is the things that are all around us that we don't even bother to look at. That happens to everybody in every place they're familiar with, in their city, even in their yard, certainly in this place. I don't know how many of you realize how truly fortunate we are to have in this church what I have behind me right now. That's 3 Tiffany's. That's 3 more than everybody else has, and we have 7. We have one of the largest collections of Tiffany windows in any parish church in the world, and we don't realize that in many cases, like a lot of other things. Now, the guy that did this is Louis Comfort Tiffany. Now, how many of you have been there when I've done this before? How many folks? Okay, correct me when I change my mind. These windows, all 3 are Tiffany's, and they mark a lot of things about Tiffany. I'm going to tell you a little bit about him first, and then we're going to talk about the windows. Louis Comfort Tiffany was his own kind of Renaissance man because he sort of caused the Renaissance. He was the arbiter of American taste for about 50 years. He was from the family of Tiffany jewelers, and there are many stories about Tiffany that are simply not true, associated with him all the time. One of them is he was a portrait artist, which is true, and he was a landscape artist, which is true. And that's where his love was originally. And the legend is that he left his rich and famous family to seek his own way as an artist. That's not true. He was the artistic director for Tiffany all of his life, for his father, and then on for the family as it went on. Very much involved with that, and he painted all of his life. But somewhere in the midst of all that, he got some other callings. In 1879, he was born in 1848. In 1879, he decided he might try interior design. He had what he thought was a penchant for it. So he started off publishing an idea or two, and he started talking to some of his parents' friends. Now, this guy started a business in 1879. In 1880, he did Cornelius Vanderbilt's house. Not a bad first one. In 1881, he did Mark Twain's in Hartford, Connecticut. Not a bad client. And in 1882, now this is just 3 years into the business, he did the White House for Chester Arthur, who was from New York. So he had a pretty good start as an interior designer. But in the course of all that, he started to play with glass. And obviously, that's what made him world famous. Although he did a lot of other things, the glass is what we remember him for. Because of something called the American School of Glass. John Lafarge, anybody know who John Lafarge is? Have you heard that name? John Lafarge was arguably the other famous glass artist in Tiffany. There were a number of them, but those are the 2 most famous. Started this school. And what is common to this school is they decided that glass was a nobler art than it had been declining over the years. All the stained glass from the Middle Ages and forward had started to reduce itself to singular planes of color and not much imagination, and things weren't really going very well for that particular world. And they changed that a lot. The American School of Glass started the plating process with opalescent glass. Glass that's known for its translucence, how it captures light, what it does when the light goes through it. This school used glass, and this is where we're going to get to these windows. They used glass in layers to produce all of their effects. Nothing could be painted in the American School of Glass except features like hands, like feet, things like that. You can see that in these windows. And the leading itself, this was a brand new conceit. The leading itself was used as an element of the design itself to indicate folds, like a drawing, like you were using leading, like you would use a brush or a pen to create the folds and these robes you see behind you to create everything. Now I'm going to walk over here. I urge all of you, when you've got a few minutes in here, to get this close to these windows and look at it. The effect that Tiffany achieves, that makes it a Tiffany window, is the plating process by using layers of glass to achieve all the subtlety you see in these windows. All the layers of color you see in these windows are done by anything from one very thin layer of glass to as many as 7 or 8 layers of glass of varying depth and various width, so that they achieve the subtlety you see in the shadows, the subtlety you see in the folds, the subtlety you see in the color, are all done by putting glass on top of glass on top of glass across a whole plane and having that play with light. Is anybody familiar with the artist Caravaggio? Anybody who knows Caravaggio? Caravaggio was a deeply disturbed, dark man, but he did things with light that no other painter has done before or since, with the exception of Vermeer. Does everybody know who Vermeer is? Dutch painter. What they could do with light to manufacture the effect of light with paint is what the American School of Glass and what Louis Comfort Tiffany did, in fact, on the other extreme, by using light to create art. He understood light in such a way that he would produce these images that all during the course of today and every day, they subtly change as the sun moves through the sky. And we will see a different window this afternoon. We will see a different window at noon, but we'll see the same basic concept. But the light of the day will affect the window all day, and he understood that. Imagine a giant 3D jigsaw puzzle made out of glass where everything is piled on top of everything else in 3 dimensions to create this effect. When we redid these windows, we took them apart, piece by piece. In a huge barn in Mississippi, numbered every single piece and lined them up and down the length and breadth of that barn, cleaned every single piece, and had to put them back together again. And it was a huge undertaking because there will never be windows like this again for obvious reasons. Tiffany's dead, number one. Number two, nobody can spend that kind of time and that kind of effort to produce this kind of art. Now, all windows are art in form, but this is art in its highest form because of what it does, and it will never do it again to that extent. I invite you to look at this window maybe with a new light. But understand the difference of being able to achieve this kind of effect with laying layers of glass on layers of glass. And come look at it when you get a chance. Now, back to my point about light all day. Christ the light here in the middle. Notice the lantern. The lantern looks like it has a light bulb in it. Now, as the day gets darker in late afternoon, that light remains that intense inside that lantern. How the hell they did that, I have no idea. But that is the brightest point in that particular window, and it's the brightest point in that window no matter what time of day you see that window, because that was his point. Notice the features on these people. We'll see other examples of that before we're through here today. But the faces on the angels, the hands, the feet, their feet have wrinkles, their fingers have wrinkles, their faces have personality. These are realistic renditions of these angels with human features. Most stained glass windows, and we have a number of them like this too, everyone is 35 years old. Whether they're a baby, whether they're an old man, whatever they are, they're all 35, they don't have any wrinkles, and they all have the same expression. There's some personality to these. And if you see Christ in a window by Tiffany, and there are other windows with Christ in them in the neighborhood, you will see the same Christ. You see him in profile, you'll realize that's the same Christ that you saw facing you, and so on. We have examples of that in the chapel, which we're going to look at in a little while. Now, this window in the middle reminds me of a story. How many people remember Charlie Clark? There you go. When we were doing the Evans building, I was on the vestry, and Helen von Fossen, was the senior warden. And she was making an impassioned speech about how God intended us to build that addition because it had come to her attention that the foundation of this building lined up with the foundation of the gym, and therefore we could build a building in between, and God intended to be that way. The fact that when they built the gym, they did that on purpose just sort of hurt that story. So like John Belushi, we just let it roll with it. Everybody was encouraged about that. Then she decided, while she was on a roll, she would also point out that we had discovered, and no one knew about it, that we had an original Tiffany window in a crate in a one-car garage when we tore down the house. One-car garage with a dirt floor. On that dirt floor was a crate. When they opened the crate, they found that window. And she said, God also intended us to find that window that we'd forgotten about and never knew. Charlie raised his hand. He said, Helen, that's great, but I know I had gotten that crate, I put it there. Now that tells, I'm going to pass this around. I got a couple of these. This will go around the room to prove that I'm not crazy. Start that one. That's right over here. Just pass this around and have a look at it. It's a bad copy, but you can tell what it is. It's this room, taken in the early 1960s. Camera back there, you're looking at this wall. This is what happened to Louis Comfort Tiffany. As I said, for 50 years, everything. But in 1932, he declared bankruptcy. And in 1933, he was dead. And he was forgotten. And what he did, and his work, his lamps and everything else, started in decline, and people didn't much care about it anymore. This particular church had that window. But this room, when it was originally built, was a multi-purpose room. It was a gym and a parish hall. And back there where you see the coffee is, that was a theater, or a raised platform, much like we have over here in McClure now. And this end of the room was like a half gym. It had a balcony up there where you see this faux ceiling. The balcony went around. The balcony went across here. That window was in that wall. And in front of it was a basketball goal. In front of an original Tiffany window. And the only thing that kept that basketball from all these kids throwing it up in the general direction of the basket from taking that window out was chicken wire. One strand of chicken wire. So, Helen, we did have a miracle. And the miracle is that window is still here. So we moved it back in here once it was found, when this wall was done. The angel windows on either side, most of you will remember, were once in the chancel. The morning angel here, the evening angel there. Both of them have resurrection themes. The lily is a symbol of the resurrection. The palm is a symbol of victory. But we call them the morning and evening angels because they were in the east and west sides of the chancel originally. Now, some of you may not be aware of that because, like good Episcopalians, you don't look side to side when you go to communion. You walk up there, you kneel, you take communion, you come back, you sit down, you talk about what everybody's wearing. That's what we do. We don't look side to side, it's rude. So, a lot of people didn't even know those windows were there, and they were there for a long, long time. They originally came from Grace Church. All of our Tiffany's came from Grace Church. All the woodwork in the chancel came from Grace Church. The pulpit came from Grace Church. A number of other things we have up there came from Grace Church. Much of what came from St. Luke's is in the chapel, which was created at the time of the merger to preserve some of that. We're going to go in there in a minute. Tiffany, another one of the legends, lamps. How many people in here think that Tiffany is more famous for lamps than he is for these windows? You're probably right, and the person who would disagree with you would be Tiffany. In his official biography in 1915, lamps are not mentioned in the 400 plus pages. He didn't like lamps. He made a lot of money off lamps, but he didn't like them. He was brilliant in what he conceived to be lamps, but lamps were made literally out of the stuff they found on the floor. I mean, after they were doing windows, what were they going to do with all this wonderful glass they had left over? So they found ways to take bits and pieces and parts and engineer them and lead them and do things with them that created another craze. And they were very affordable for art at its time, which brings me to the other dichotomy that Tiffany had. He didn't like his lamps. He hated it, but he made a lot of money off of it, so he kept doing it. The other thing he didn't like was us. He did not like religious windows, one bit. But he did them because he got huge commissions. Remember, after the Civil War, there was an explosion in churches across the country, an explosion of people moving to cities across the country, and all of a sudden there was an unheard of amount of churches, and they all wanted to outdo whoever was down the street. They were buying a lot of stained glass, and they were putting it in a lot of places. Grace Church being the example locally where all these windows came from. And they needed to make a point, and he would take that point. But it bothered his creative spirit, his individual creative spirit. Very rich man selling to very rich people mostly, still considered himself an artist, an individual artist, not an industrial artist. And it bothered him to the day he died that he was going across the spectrum so much he didn't know where he was or who he was many times. That's why he rejected the notion of lamps being a great accomplishment. It was just something to keep the factory running. And they're magnificent. What he did like about the lamps that nobody talks about is the bronze bases. He designed the bronze bases, and he's very proud of that. Really did like what he did for the bases. So that's the story about lamps. Back to the religious detail. He would much rather do windows where the concept was his, the execution was his, and he could express himself in his studio in more creative ways in his estimation. But there are just so many Vanderbilts with just so many big landings on just so many stairs that can accommodate private commission like this. So that's where the churches came in. Now the reason is that we all are and have been on church committees. We're in church right now. If the church hires you to do a window and pays that kind of money, they want you, Mr. Tiffany, to do your best work. Feel free to do anything you want to. But remember, Jesus stands here, and he has blue eyes. It doesn't have to be blonde, but a little bit of it in his hair would be better. And the angels look like this, and the children look like this, and they sit here. And he would have to take a lot of that and create what he did around it. Now, what I think is so magnificent is what he's done here with that kind of background. What we see here, as I said, is art. It's inspirational. It is a religious piece, but it's also a wonderful work of art times 3. And the sum of that total is much greater than that. So that we have the benefit of seeing this every time we come in this room. And you should look at it every time you come in this room. And you should go up to it and look at the work. Look at the work very carefully, because it's an amazing, amazing thing. Now, we're going to move, so everybody get ready for that. We're going to go in the church and talk a little bit about some things in there. But before we do, does anybody want to ask about Tiffany? The reason I'm rushing this is we're going to have to hurry. Anybody any questions?
Yeah, did Grace Church commission all 7 pieces at
Yes.
once?
Yes. No, not at once. No.
How much would a typical...
The first Tiffany window we're going to see, the first Tiffany window is the biggest Tiffany window we have, the one they commissioned as a result of seeing his work at the 1900 Paris Exposition, is the gauge Ascension window, which is over the doors of the church on People in the center. That's a Tiffany.
Now, did he just oversee this, or this replication of his drawing?
That one, the gauge Ascension window.
He had technicians put it
No,
together.
he did that design, and he oversaw the design's execution. And he came to Memphis for the installation of the Grace Church. That is the only one of the 7 he did. They're all the mark of his studio, and like many of these studios that existed, you know, the artist whose name is on that studio doesn't do all the work, but they do supervise and approve all the design. But the one that he is associated with most in Memphis, documented, is the Ascension window we have over the doors, because that's the one he came to Memphis to supervise the installation of. Okay, anything else? All right, what we're going to try and do is spend just about the next 15 minutes in the church, because I want to point out a few things to you. On your table are brochures. I don't know anybody's seen these before, but we have them. And on the inside, open that all the way up, Lee. Be a model for me. Inside, sometime when you've got a few minutes, inside is a map of our church. It tells you about every single stained glass window we've got and all the art in the church. And it describes what the symbols in those windows are and where you can find them, what they mean, and some history about the windows themselves. So that's what we're kind of going over very briefly. But when you've got some time, take one of these and just take a stroll through your own church, because you may not have been looking side by side. Richard touched on this a couple of weeks ago when he talked about the war window. Every kid at Grace St. Luke's knows about the war window, but most other people don't, because they don't look over there. But it's a pretty interesting window if you're a kid. You know, a lot of Satan and a lot of swords and tanks and airplanes and things on fire. It's pretty interesting. Okay, we're going to go into the chapel. And I think probably the best way to do that, everybody knows about the secret door, don't they? All right, let's just go through this way. I don't know if all of us are going to be able to get in there. We'll get as many as we can. We'll just spend a few minutes, and then whoever didn't get in there, I'll do that right now. Then we're going to move into the church front there. Or as they say in the tour guides, we're moving. We're moving. Need an umbrella. All right, while everybody's gathering in here, I often like to tell the stories. This altar right here, this chapel didn't exist until the merger in 1940 of Grace and St. Luke's. This was St. Luke's altar, which was up against the wall, as you can tell, and it was up against the back wall of the chancel, where our altar is now, except moved forward. The altar we have now was in Grace Church, that has the Cairo symbol on the front of it. That altar was intended to be a temporary altar here because they were commissioned to build a new one, and they never did. They kept that when it was originally up against the wall. That's why every once in a while you hear a priest kick the bottom of the, because there's no toe kick under the back of that altar, so you're constantly banging your feet up against it. Because it was moved when we decided that the priest didn't have to have, at that time they were all he's, his back to all of us, and would turn around and face us, they moved the altar out. This is the original St. Luke's altar. This woodwork in here came from St. Luke's, not from Grace, because all the woodwork that's in the chancel came from Grace. They moved woodwork that St. Luke's had in here, built this chapel. This altar, underneath it, is Charles Stewart Hale, who was the second rector of Grace St. Luke's Church. He was the rector of St. Luke's Church. He lost. Reverend Gary, the rector of Grace Church, got to be rector when they merged. Charles Stewart Hale, Dr. Hale, was the associate rector. He didn't like that. He didn't like that literally to right now. Literally to the day he died and forever. Because as an honor to him, after Reverend Gary died 7 or 8 years later after the merger, Dr. Hale became the rector. And when they offered him the honor of being buried under the altar, he said, "Not under that one." That's Grace Church's altar. Bury me under St. Luke's altar. So he's buried under here. So he never got over the fact that. And another cute little story about that, this will be quick. When he died, his son was an associate rector. He was not called to be rector. And Mrs. Hale was not very happy about that. So she took her gardener and a wheelbarrow, put on a black dress, a little black hat, lived down here on Peabody, rolled the wheelbarrow down here and supervised the removal of the rose bushes she had given to the church. Rolled them back down Peabody and replanted them. Purely symbolic, since the house she lived in was a rectory, it was owned by the church. But she made her point. So that's a little bit of a side about where we are. Isn't this gorgeous? Now, in the terms of Sesame Street, look over here at the wall. Which of these things is not like the other? Thank you, yes. Notice on the fourth window over, everybody's 35. Notice the child down below, it's 35. The little girl, little boy, they're all 35. And they couldn't be more bored with the proceedings. Now, it's a fine window in terms of the quality of the glass, but it's not a Tiffany. These three are. These were in the children's chapel at Grace Church, and that's why they came to the chapel here. The theme is obviously Christ the child. And what I said in the other room, notice Joseph in this first window. Now notice Joseph in the second window. That's the same man. The idea of profile and forward. Look at the detail achieved entirely by glass in these windows. Look at the depth of color and light in the nativity scene here on the Christ child and on Mary. Look at Joseph, the greens in his robe, the gold. My favorite is look at Jesus as a boy in his father's carpenter shop. Look at that robe. Look at how it sheds light. It sheds light. The same thing is true at Jesus in the temple. Third one over. Little details. The books piled up. The rag on the floor down here in the carpenter shop. That gold bar, yellow bar, whatever that color is, across the bottom of Jesus' robe. The depth of shadow and light, and the perspective of all of that being correct, even made out of layers of glass. Each one of these windows is an achievement. The bronze and gold, the bronze tips and so forth, and the wings of the angel. So this is a place where you can, because why have we got the lights? Somebody turn the lights on. I mean, please. There you go. Those windows light this room. So sometime when you've got a few minutes again, just come in here and sit for a while. People do that. And look at the windows. Just think about things. Look at those windows. Okay. Anybody have any questions in here? We're going to move into the church for 5 minutes. Everybody just go into the church in the center aisle, okay? And I will join you there. you see around that. And every other window in here, with the exception of that one, in the corner of this transept, were all done by Payne Spear Studios. When the church merged in 1940, there was no stained glass in here except for that window, which was not there. And the windows that you see above the altar. All of these windows were that sort of translucent wavy glass with the leading in it that you see on the windows going up to the balcony, up the stairs. The windows in there. That's what all the windows in here were like. There's a wonderful picture in the history that Barbara Visor did of Edith's mother and father getting married in front of that altar in 1940, the first marriage after the merged church. It's a gorgeous picture. And now, Payne Spears. When they got here, there was a lot of acrimony, I referred to a little bit about it, between Grace and St. Luke's. The two churches didn't merge by choice. The two churches merged because the bishop had a shotgun wedding. The bishop said, Grace Church, you've got a lot of money and you want to move. St. Luke's, you don't have any money and you need to have somebody that does join you. That's the basic reason. The interesting thing here is that Grace Church had already put an option on a piece of property to build a new church. You know where they were going to build it? Between the cathedral and Calvary. On top. There would have been 3 Episcopal churches, bam, 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 ending in the cathedral. The bishop said, no, you will merge with St. Luke's. So he forced that merger. As I mentioned, there was acrimony about it. But to try and bring the church together, the project they came up with was to do all these stained glass windows. Tell the story of the gospel, starting with the Annunciation and that transept, with Mary and the angel. We go all the way around and finish over here with the resurrection. Okay. And it tells the story in order with verses from St. Luke. And every one of those windows is verse, and every one of those windows tells the story in order. And he just walked in, except for Shep's family's window. When they decided to give that window, Shep's family, they were told, well, we would love to have a crucifixion window. But, you know, that's not where we want to have it. And they said, well, that's where we want it. And if we're going to give it, that's where it's going to be. So Shep's family window is in that corner down there. And the gospel goes bam, 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 bam. We have a crucifixion, bam, 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 bam. And then we have another one. So we got a couple of them in here. And it's a beautiful testimony to what a church can do. It took 25 years to do it. Because right after they decided to do it, commissioned Payne Spears, Second World War. So they took off the Second World War, obviously. And then they picked back up again, and they finished the project in 1965, and I think the last window wasn't in order because they did them according to who wanted to give what. It was over here somewhere, and I forget where it was. So it took a long time, but that whole reason we have these windows is to bring the church together in a common project, which was huge in size and scope. There are, and that's why I wanted you to take a look at the brochures you have when you get a chance, because there are symbols in every one of these windows. I think that's what's most notable about them. Each one of them tells a story, not only pictorially, but also in the symbols they have that represent various things in the church. You will see examples of that. This window here in the transept, all the signs of the sacrament are in that window up there above. There's a sign of the priesthood. You see the omega shape of the soul here. Next to that is reconciliation with a handshake. Above that is 2 rings around the cross. That's marriage. You can point my kids out. Over here is a whip for penance. They're all there. And then also the monograms for Christ are here. You know, there are some that think that IHS stands for in his service. It does not. It is the first 3 letters of Jesus in Latin. So it is a monogram for Jesus. Just like the Chi-Rho is Greek for the first letters of Christ. The Chi-Rho, which you see an example of in front of our altar, is a monogram of Christ in Greek. So those 2 things happen. You can see an example of that INRI in this original St. Luke's window up there. Jesus, J was an I, Latin. Jesus of Nazareth, King Rex of the Jews. So That's what IMRI stands for. Those kinds of symbols are everywhere. The kids love this window over here. It has on the bottom of it, victory through defeat. And it's the word Nike, which is taken from the Greek goddess of victory, Nike. And that's where they get their name.
Which one is that?
That's the, I believe it is the third window over from the corner here. I believe, either third or fourth. No, from this corner, right here.
Yeah.
It's either third or fourth, one of those two. You'll see it at the very bottom. Now, let's see, what else is there? Okay, turn around and face that up there. We're going to kind of go up. There's a lot going on up there that you should be aware of and pay attention to, because we're very limited at all. There was a fire at Grace Church in the 1890s, burned the church to the ground. And the only thing that survived, this is one of those things you love to tell the church, is that cross. We sorted through all the ashes, there was the cross. So that cross survived the fire, and that's all it did. They rebuilt the church. And as part of that rebuilding process, that's when somebody went to the Paris Exposition and saw the work of Tiffany in 1900 and commissioned him for that signature window. And the other windows as well would follow. So we all know that these windows all happened between, I'd say, 1900 and 1915, something like that. Is that right, S.J.? What do you think? Okay, good. You know more than I do. So, we were lucky to have all of that. The Last Supper, and I should tell everybody it's about it towards, I can't stand it. But the Last Supper is a beautiful piece. It's a beautiful reproduction. That's the only reason I can't stand it, because it's not original art. It's a copy of somebody else's. I don't have anything against mosaics. There's some 45,000 pieces of mosaic in that mosaic piece. 45,000 of them. That was commissioned by a New York artist, by Grace Church again, and came to us from Grace Church. As I mentioned, it's not an original, and I love mosaics, but if you go into St. Peter's Basilica, all those mosaics weren't copies of anything. But the other name for that picture that an historian of Tiffany came in and said, the name of that picture is, I want everybody to get on that side of the table for the photograph.
Only everybody to get on that side of the table.
Now, up there too, the altar, you can't see them from here, but before you kneel next time, take a look at the cushion you're kneeling on. The ladies of the church did that as another project to unify the church and keep people involved. They're all hand-stitched, and they all represent the Gospel of St. Luke. And the ladies picked what they wanted to represent, and they stitched all that in every one of those cushions, and every one of those cushions has some of them one, but most often two different pieces of scripture represented in the cushion itself. And whoever did it is on the front of the cushion.
The initials. Their initials.
Their initials, right. And the same thing is true about, you don't see these unless you're up in the chancel, but the acolyte kneelers is some of the prettiest stitch work I've ever seen with the descending dove. It's just gorgeous stuff that we have, so pay attention when you go up and look at it. The windows above the altar of the Gospel, Christ in the center, were original to St. Luke. The legend there, and we don't seem to have anything to document it, is that those windows were made from 17th century glass that was recovered, and those windows were made from that. It seems to make some sense because of the nature of the glass. It's very old glass. So if you choose to believe that, fine, because I really can't document it, but it does look like the glass is probably that old. Okay, that's very quick. Oh, one thing, the apostle lamp that's hanging up there is also a very nice piece. If you want to look, all 12 apostles are around the edge of that lamp. You see a brass lamp hanging up there. And when the light is lit, that means that there is reserved sacrament over there in the ombre, which is on the wall of the chancel. In other words, blessed wine and blessed hosts, so that you know that you have something to meet. That's what that light means. All right, Dan, you're here. That's right, isn't it? Good. All right, good. I got that. Okay. Any questions in here before we let? Yes, ma'am. Oh, they were on the. I'm sorry. The morning and evening angels were up there on the side.
With no light.
With no light. I forgot to tell you that when I was in there. This far up on both of those angel windows, this far up was covered in tar when we redid the windows. Covered in tar. You couldn't read the bottom 2 feet, sometimes plus, because of tar, because there was a roof opposite that one where the window is. And same thing was over here, a roof, and they gathered tar and grit and grime, and nobody ever cleaned it. And the evening angel was on the west wall, the morning angel was on the east wall, and if you were serving up there, of course, you got to see them, and other people didn't. I should point out to you one other thing. When we redid the windows, that whole, not just the Tiffany in the middle, that whole wall of glass, you could go up on the balcony, and this is how I got people to start raising money. Put your hand on it and move the whole thing. You could feel the whole thing move. The wood was rotten, the leading was decaying, the glass was loose, it was warped. We were a good windstorm from having that be on Piedmont. The whole thing, all the pane spear windows and the Tiffany. And we had nothing on the outside to do them. Now all these windows are protected by literally bulletproof glass. And a physics problem was solved too, because they're all vented now, like the other attempts to cover it, we didn't, so all the heat was captured inside, which further warped the windows. You could look at the side and the windows went like that. Now they're all protected and vented, and nothing's going to happen to them. Not from the outside, anyway.
He did this one crucifixion window right here. He didn't,
Oh, that's the one, I don't know who did that. That was in St. Luke's. And I'm not sure where it was in St. Luke's, but it was the only stained glass window other than the ones above the altar that was in the church. And that's the war windows that Richard mentioned over there in the corner. Oh, by the way, again, symbolic. Above the war windows is the seal of the United States Navy and the seal of the United States Army in the stained glass at the top. All right? Yes, ma'am. Woodwork, all the woodwork came from Grace Church. As a matter of fact, there was not enough room for it. That's why we have one of the deepest chancels for a church this size anywhere. We had to add 15 feet to the depth of the chancel to accommodate the woodwork coming from Grace Church. So roughly, a little bit past, but roughly where the altar rail is now back didn't exist. And to get all this woodwork in, they backed the church up. And that's where they had the roof top that they could put in the 2 angel windows on the side of the addition. All that woodwork came from Grace Church. You'll see an original picture of St. Luke's. There were organ pipes on this wall. And at the time that they did the merger, they combined the organ pipes from both Grace Church and St. Luke's Church, and they had the largest organ in the South by far. You know, the thing about the Episcopal Church is we still think we do. You know, if you've had it once, you have it forever. A lot of people still think we're the largest parish in the state of Tennessee, too. That's not true either. It once was. So those kinds of things live on. Okay, thank you, guys. And the architect will be back later on in the summer.